Welcome back. So what gets your heart pumping more? The fact President Trump will name his choice for the Supreme Court Monday a pick that will tip the balance of the high court and possibly mean Roe versus Wade's days are numbered. Or how about that rally last night in Montana, the president mocking the Me2 movement, a Republican president who just lost his wife, a U.S. senator dying of brain cancer, a woman senator, a black congresswoman, journalists a week after 5 were shot dead, all while expressing admiration for North Korea's dear leader, disdain for NATO, saying we're schmucks for supporting it, and expressing admiration for Vladimir Putin, who annexed Crimea and, by the way, interfered with our presidential election, which, by the way, the Republican-controlled Senate Intelligence Committee concluded this week. Joining us for more is New College Florida political science professor Keith Fitzgerald, the political editor of SRQ magazine Jacob Ogles, and Lynn Larson of the Sarasota Republican Party. Thank you all for joining us. And Lynn, let me first get your reaction to one of the many things the president said last night, and that is about the Me Too movement.
Let's say I'm debating Pocahontas, right? I promise you I'll do this. I will take, you know those little kits they sell on television for $2? Learn your heritage. We will take that little kit and say, but we have to do it gently. Because we're in the Me Too generation, so we have to be very gentle.
Lynn, as a Republican, as a woman, what do you think of that?
I've been part of the Me Too, I can tell you, because I've been there, and I was there when women weren't supposed to be, according to my coworkers, and the coworkers and some of my bosses politely let me know and impolitely let me know that I did not belong there. But I think it's a problem now for us to hinge our entire present on trying to look back at the past and redo what was happening at that time.
But it comes at a time when, according to a brand new Washington Post poll, that only 32% of all women approve of the president's job performance.
Well, 32% may approve of the job he's doing, but you know, how many disapprove? Do we know how many disapprove?
Okay, we could get into a little bit more, but Jacob, let me ask you this. What impact does it have around here, especially with Republican women, especially considering the special election a couple of months ago where a lot of Republican women crossed over to vote for Margaret Good?
Well, and you're seeing a lot of women running across the board, and in fact this area for years, not just recently, has shown a preference among the candidates for women running for office more than other areas. So it's interesting. I'm not sure what it's going to translate into this November. I do think that it's kind of another spin on the pushback to political correctness that worked well for Trump in 2016.
And Keith, that's an important point, because isn't it true that the vast majority of Trump supporters really don't care about what he says at rallies like that? They are with him thick and thin. They're basically, many of them say, that he is simply saying what they're all thinking.
Well, I hope they're not all thinking some of the things he said last night. You know, I think there are some people who continue to support him in spite of this kind of behavior. I think there are some people who support him precisely because of this kind of behavior, and that's sort of a different group. I think the thing that's so disturbing is that when you made your comments about the Me Too movement, we could have a reasonable discussion about, is it in the place where it needs to be? He's mocking a topic that's really important. And he was mocking a whole bunch of things last night, and Republican presidents is just unseemly.
Our conversation on The Week in Washington continues. Welcome back. We are discussing The Week in Washington, and joining us for more are former state representative Keith Fitzgerald, the political editor of SRQ magazine Jacob Ogles, and Sarasota Republican Party member Lynn Larson. There's so much to go over, and also to go over from the president's rally last night. You know, it was pure Trump, but a lot of people are taking notice in terms of how he went about, you know, taking jabs at former President George Bush, who, as we know, recently lost his wife. This is part of what the president had to say.
I know one thing. Make America great again, we understand. Putting America first, we understand. 1,000 points of light. I never quite got that one. I'm trying to say, what the hell is that? Has anyone ever figured that one out? And it was put up by a Republican.
You know, Lynn, I know this is almost kind of freestyle thinking and speech making here, but there are a lot of Republicans here on the Sun Coast who hold President Bush with some reverence, not to mention his age and everything else. Was that necessary?
I don't think any Republican likes 100% of what President Trump says or does some days, but he does go off script. I think what we do like is what he's accomplishing and what he's trying to accomplish.
You know, Keith, I mean, look, new numbers came out today, the jobs report. You know, jobs are being created. Unemployment ticked up slightly just because more people are looking for jobs right now. So there's a point.
Well, first, as far as his rhetoric is concerned, it's really just not defensible. And we do want from our president a sense of optimism and being uplifting and that we can pull together.
But who's we? I mean, because obviously...
Well, what I was going to say is I think one of the things about President Trump we have to realize is that he's a symptom of a decline in our culture on both sides of the political spectrum. He's not the cause, and so we should acknowledge that. I think that if we talked about policy, it really has not been a very good week for President Trump. The economy's chunking along based on the policies the last president put into place, but now it's starting to show some signs of moving in a different direction because of this imminent trade war.
Lynn is smiling, but Jacob, I'll give you the question here because a lot of the supporters of the president here on the Sun Coast look at the jobs numbers and say, you know what, he's getting it done.
Well, I'll tell you, I always find it somewhat amusing when political parties start arguing over statistics and long-term effects and all this sort of thing when it comes to the economy. All that really matters to voters is how the economy feels in their own lives. Is their own job safe? Do they see a future with where they're going? That's what's going to matter.
And by the way, although you know those numbers look good, pay is not really increasing for many Americans, and that's an important point. We are just getting warmed up. Our conversation on the week in Washington will continue after this break. Welcome back. If you're just tuning in, we are discussing the week in Washington, and joining us for more, our former state representative and current New College of Florida political science professor Keith Fitzgerald, the political editor of SRQ magazine Jacob Ogles, and Sarasota Republican Party member Lynn Larson. It was such an eventful week. It's going to be a huge week next week when the president announces his pick for the U.S. Supreme Court on Monday, and then he goes abroad. He goes to talk to NATO. And then he goes and talks to President Putin of Russia. And the president talked about Putin yesterday after he took jabs at President Bush and John McCain and Maxine Waters and journalists. But this is what he said about NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which has been part of our being for over 50 years.
Okay, so they want to protect against Russia, yet they pay billions of dollars to Russia, and we're the schmucks that are paying for the whole thing.
Now, particularly, the president is talking about Germany, and it should be noted that the only time that NATO has been called up to actually fight is after 9/11, when the Germans fought along us in Afghanistan, and I believe over 50 Germans died for us in Afghanistan. Why are we taking shots at NATO while giving Putin all these accolades?
I don't think it's just Germany. I think one of the problems is if you look at the European countries and the amount of money that they spend on defense versus what we're spending on defense to defend them. I think that's the problem. Their economy can grow significantly better.
What is the alternative? The president suggested taking our troops out of Germany, which I would imagine advances the cause of Russia, who, for so many decades threatened rolling tanks into Germany.
I don't think he's going to take the troops out of Germany, but I think he's probably trying to negotiate a better deal with Germany on the fact that we are representing and defending all the NATO countries.
Fair enough, Jacob. I mean, it's really kind of remarkable who the president chooses to go after and who the president shows a lot of respect for.
Well, certainly the issue with Putin, it surprised me for 2 years now how no matter what criticism comes at him for his favorable discussions about Putin, he doesn't stop. It never seems to generate positive press for him. Now, in terms of the NATO stuff, I think what you're seeing here is an extension of a growing nationalism that we've seen not just in the United States but overseas. And you know what? The domestic press focuses a lot on some of the negative things that can accompany nationalism, but at its core, what drives that is this feeling that, that countries ought to be standing for themselves. That's going to drive the conversation here. It's also driving the conversation in a lot of European nations. And that makes you wonder where NATO and the UN are going to play a role, not just here but abroad.
Keith, isn't that fair enough? Because people, whether you're Republican or Democrats or independents on the Suncoast, may believe in the core mission of NATO if they really think about NATO at all. But in this day and age, the president makes a point that it is something that all these countries have to pay into, if not evenly, at least pay their fair weight.
Well, you should listen to what was just said about nationalism because it's very important. I think there's a very legitimate question about why it is the case that individual European countries have not carried their fair share, and getting tough on them is fine. But this is a real deviation in our policy toward a highly nationalistic one. And the problem with nationalism is it corrodes a sense of unity within, because when they say us, it never is inclusive of the entire population. So it sets up fissures that often lead to very bad things. And internationally, if it's everybody for themselves, that can lead to international conflict. And you just said it, it's very, very important. We have done very well by NATO. So if we have a complaint about payment schedules, fine, let's negotiate it. But NATO has worked so great for the United States. It has been so fantastic. We've developed and helped develop a gigantic economic partner. If you look at EU as if it were a country, the United States are 1, 2 in the biggest economies in the world. And that's because of NATO. It's done extremely well for us, and we shouldn't be facile about throwing it out the window.
All right, let's rocket through a couple of other issues that are really important, including the president's pick for the U.S. Supreme Court that is going to take place on Monday. Lynn, I don't know how you feel about the pick. I don't know how you feel about Roe versus Wade, but what are you hoping for in terms of a justice that the president picks on Monday?
The people that I have read that are in the list, in the short list, I'm very impressed with, and I think they all could do a great job. So I'm looking forward to it. There's 2 women that I've seen that are on the short list, and I'm looking forward to the possibility of them.
Well, let me ask you this, because for many years here on the Suncoast, you had Republicans who were great contributors to Planned Parenthood, which is headquartered here in Sarasota, and foremost on their minds at this point is whether or not Roe versus Wade is being threatened.
There's Roe versus Wade, but there's also a point where you think, if you look at premature babies, we're aborting babies that at the same time, if they were a premature baby with a mother in labor, they would be saved. There's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with the fact that it's okay to take a viable fetus and kill it.
And Keith, hold on.
Yeah.
Elections have consequences, and the president won. This was on the ballot in 2016, and Americans spoke.
Yeah, I do have to address that point. It just as a matter of fact, viable babies are not aborted in the United States. It's not allowed. Viability is not within the slot of time when abortions are permitted. And almost all abortions, 90% or more, are done in the first trimester. So those are just some facts. I can't just sort of leave that hanging out there because it's just not true. And it's sort of a really horrible thing to say. But you're right. I mean, elections do have consequences, and this is the way it's supposed to work. The president's supposed to be able to nominate a choice, and if they're nominally qualified, they're supposed to be put on the Supreme Court. That didn't happen last time, and I'm afraid the fight may happen again where the Democratic Senate may try what they can to stop this one from going forward.
Jacob, do you get any sense in terms of how people here on the Suncoast view this particular issue? It's obviously controversial, always has been, but you know, it is safe to say, unless the power changes in the state legislature, if Roe versus Wade is overturned, Florida is going to be pretty quick to outlaw in Florida.
I'd be curious to see if they really follow through with that. I think that this is a more politically divided state than the legislature's makeup would indicate. And I imagine there might be electoral consequences. I'm curious, actually, to hear, 10 years ago, it felt like there was a particularly pro-choice makeup to the Republican Party in Sarasota compared to the rest of the state. I don't know if that's true anymore, and I'd actually love to know if people think that is the case. But I wouldn't hold my breath and think Florida, the third largest state in the union, is going to be the first state to try and test an overturn of Roe versus Wade.
We shall see. We have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts in a moment. Stay with us. And our guests join us right now for final thoughts, and we're going to talk about a local election, the election for U.S. Congress in the 16th Congressional District. I hear, Keith, you know that district well. We have the first negative ad of the campaign. It is against Congressman Vern Buchanan. Let's take a look.
Vern Buchanan made millions selling used cars. Now Vern Buchanan is making millions selling the new tax law he helped write. Vern Buchanan stands to gain from the tax law he shepherded. Vern advertised it as a middle-class tax cut, but under the hood, most Americans will pay more in taxes to pay for a windfall for Buchanan of up to $2.1 million.
Wow. Well, we contacted the Buchanan campaign, and they pointed out there are two really significant issues. Jacob, one of them is the fact that we don't know who took out this ad. It comes under, I think it's the 501c4, which means that the contributors to the PAC that bought this ad on this station and many others doesn't have to reveal who is actually contributing to it, and that's what people hate about politics. Max Goodman of the Buchanan campaign says dark money groups that hide in the shadows while attempting to deceive the public are why so many people hate politics.
I mean, that's true. And I'll tell you, I don't know if your viewers will quite believe this, but nobody at this table has even the slightest idea, it sounds like, who is behind these particular ads. That's something that, considering everything that's happened with campaign finance laws since Watergate, is rather shocking.
Keith?
I completely agree with Max Goodman on this. He's just right. It's not right that we have people who can put ads on TV and not be accountable. And I might agree with some of the content of that ad, but the way we do this, it's just not right. So I agree.
Lynn, speak to the point that the ad was trying to make, and also Max Goodman goes on to say that ad criticizes a tax cut for 90% of Americans. Just sounds like a brilliant idea. We'd love to have this debate, especially since the average Florida family will save $2,200 a year thanks to the tax cut. Nancy Pelosi calls crumbs, but most people know it's a lot of money and will make a difference. But the ad points out it's going to make a bigger difference for people like Congressman Buchanan.
It may make a bigger difference for him, but he did not pass that for himself. He passed it for American families, and that's who is benefiting from it. And I hope that ad backfires. But it is a shame that in this day and age, someone can put that out without having to disclose who they are.
Both sides do ads like that.
We've got one now coming out for the Democrats for governor that, Gwen Graham. It's like we've got the Democrats beating each other up. So I'm like sitting there watching thinking, well, maybe she doesn't look quite so bad, when they're telling me how all about the things they don't like about her.
This is what people hate about politics.
I definitely think it is. And again, I mean, we could have a civil argument about whether that characterization of the tax plan is correct or not. I actually think it's fairly correct, but you have this group who we have no clue who it is, and I seriously have no clue who it is, who's interjecting themselves into this conversation. And again, it's sort of this cynical way of writing the ads, I think, that erodes the whole process.
Real quick.
Yeah. Well, it strikes me how specific that ad is. I don't know if this strikes everybody, but that wasn't just an assembly line ad that could go to any district in America. That was specifically about Vern Buchanan, who did make his money in cars.
Okay, we want to thank Keith Fitzgerald, Jacob Ogles, and Lynn Larson for joining us tonight.